Give people another minute to get settled in case anyone else comes in, and then we'll get started. Hi. Okay, good afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Donoff. I'm the editor-in-chief of Architectural Lighting magazine, and I'm pleased to introduce this session's speakers. The title of this session is LED Lighting Old News. A couple of quick housekeeping items first. Please make sure after the session is over, you can fill out the evaluation forms via the LEDucation website. If you need AIA credits, there's a sort of table desk at the far end of this hall where you can go for that. If you have any other questions, I suggest you go back upstairs to the registration area and find one of the show facilitators or anyone at the DLF, but those were the few housekeeping things. So today's panel, I have the honor of introducing Dan Blitzer, Craig Berniker, and also Melanie Taylor. Dan is principal of the Practical Lighting Workshop. He has more than 35 years of experience in lighting application, energy effectiveness, and sustainability. He currently serves on the steering committee of the U.S. Department of Energy's Next Generation Luminaires Design Competition. He's a board member and past president of the Designer Lighting Forum of New York, a fellow of the ISNA, and a director and treasurer of the Knuckles Fund for Lighting Education, as well as being lighting certified. Craig Berniker is the founder of the Lighting Education Institute, which is an educational initiative focusing primarily on lighting education for professionals in the lighting and building industry. He's professor in the Master of Fine Arts and Lighting Design program at Parsons. From 1981 through 1999, he directed the lighting education program within the Department of Architectural Engineering at Penn State University. Melanie Taylor has more than 25 years experience working as a lighting design professional, and she's head of the lighting design studio in the New York City office of WSP Lighting Design. Her work includes large-scale transportation projects, campuses, healthcare institutions, hospitality, civic locations, and lighting for urban neighborhoods. She's been responsible for several IIDA award-winning projects. She was an instructor of lighting design courses at the Seattle Art Institute and has co-presented a workshop on LEED, lighting, and sustainability at Light Fair. She is part of the steering committee and a judge for the Next Generation Luminaire competition. And she believes that integrated lighting is the key to revealing client aspirations and content-rich architecture. So without further ado, because really what you came here this afternoon was to hear these guys speak. So Craig, Dan, and Melanie, thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Quick show of hands. How many of you have previously attended one of the presentations here at LEDucation on what's going on in the Next Generation Luminaires Design Competition? So most of you are newcomers here. Well, that's terrific. So is LED lighting old news? Well, of course not. We're at LEDucation. Of course it's not old news, but it was a catchy title to, I mean, we really couldn't just say sex. Is it dead with LED? You get the idea. We wanted to introduce the changes going on here at the Next Generation Luminaires Design Competition. I'm going to talk a little bit about where the competition has been. Then Melanie is going to talk about the prototype to this year's competition. Craig, who is, by the way, also a member of the steering committee and also a judge, will talk about what we're doing right now. So what we'd like you to be able to do is understand Next Generation Luminaire Systems competition, assess the preliminary specifications that we're using for this, assess evaluation criteria for connected lighting systems, and engage with the upcoming phases of the competition. That is, we're going to ask you to indicate your interest in participation as we go forward. So, is LED lighting old news? and the subtitle, Shifting Focus from Luminaires to Connected Lighting. All right. The mission of the NGL process is to support the effective application of solid-state lighting in the general lighting market. Up until now, we've been focusing on high-quality, high-performance, solid-state lighting luminaires, okay, that achieve significant energy savings and lighting quality. You'll see that this is now going to transition to a focus on controls. The key partnerships here, of course, the Illuminating Engineering Society, the IALD, International Association of Lighting Designers, and the Department of Energy. And I would say that although you're going to be seeing members of the steering committee, the real hardcore work of this program is done by the professionals at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory out in Portland, Oregon, and Redland, Washington, and they are outstanding example of people currently working for the Department of Energy for however long that department seems to be around. Okay, the essence of NGL. Hands-on, visual, deliberative, and documented. What this means is, instead of simply looking at specifications, this competition actually examines firsthand, and you can see pictures that illustrate this. There's Melanie taking apart somebody's unfortunate lighting fixture. Visual, we look at it, we measure it, and deliberative, that is to say, it is the process of judges seeing it, measuring it, talking about it with each other, and then finally documenting all the results. Okay, from NGL, next generation luminaires, to NGLS, next generation next generation lighting systems. And you can see, 2008, we began. Our first effort coincided, of course, with the first years of LEDucation. We then split into separate indoor and outdoor competitions because the number of participants exceeded the ability to do it at one time. Starting in 2015, we started to focus on control and service. 2016, we did our prototype, Melanie will talk about, and now 2017, our entire competition is devoted exclusively to indoor connected lighting systems. And this is a major change in the operation. There we go. Do you have questions as we go?
Sure.
People should feel free to raise questions. We've got time in this presentation as we go through. Don't worry about interrupting.
I think we were told that all of the lights would go off if we dim the lights, so it might be too much.
And besides, we have no pillows.
So sorry, it would be nicer if this was turned off at the screen. Yeah. I don't know if we could try it.
Sure, let's try it. Will it be okay for him?
What did you suggest? Oh. Craig, maybe turn this room off if possible.
Well, the ones that we need to take off, that were off for Craig's presentation, are the ones directly over the screen. How's that? How's that, Mr. Videographer? We're okay.
That's better, thank you.
How much energy are we saving?
No, that's good. So as Dan mentioned, I'm going to walk us through our 2016 Connected Lighting System evaluation. This was really meant to be kind of a pilot in our direction, shifting away from luminaire-only evaluation to systems and controls. Some other changes we made in 2016 have to do with looking at high lumen capability general use fixtures. So those would be recessed downlights or pendant mount downlights that would be used in a high ceiling application, perhaps in a conference center, ballroom or hall, that type of application where you need a real high efficacy, high lumen output, highly controllable, instant-on, dimmable light source, that was a real hole in the market because metal halide didn't really work because of the controllability, and compact fluorescent didn't really work because of the lumen output needed. So we were still, in some cases, using quartz sources for that type of application. So we wanted to look at that as something that was still needed in the marketplace. Also, high lumen output LEDs can be a source of glare. That has been an issue. So we wanted to look at this type of high lumen, high performance fixture that would be used in a front of house, non-industrial space, and really select some of the best ones for that application. And then we really focused on controllability, so I'll be going through our connected lighting systems evaluation, but we also required every light fixture that was submitted for the indoor competition to have digital dimming. So when we first started looking at dimming, it was just an additional thing that we looked at if it dimmed, and then we started looking at the quality of dimming, and then for 2016 we required dimming. And then we also had 2 special categories of judging for dim to warm and then color tuning control as well. So that was also a focus of the 2016 indoor evaluation. And then for outdoor, we looked at pedestrian scale, outdoor light fixtures in particular, again, an area of the industry where there has been a lot of wide variety of quality of light, also a lot of glare, and an area of the market that is being transformed by LEDs. Street lighting, of course, a lot of municipalities changing to LED light sources, but also looking at the pedestrian scale where, you know, again, that can be a high glare situation. And then sensor integrated garage light fixtures, helping people meet those energy code requirements by having some of the garage fixtures cycle off or cycle to 50% and seeing who is really, you know, applying that in their fixtures most successfully. So as a steering committee, every year we're looking at what is really happening in the market, what are the current issues in the market, and that's why as a group we have decided to move towards systems, evaluating whole systems instead of just light fixtures. When we first started looking at these fixtures, you know, it was color quality, it was flicker, it was efficacy, it was cost, it was, you know, being able to service the fixtures. And now that the industry has kind of moved past those being a real concern, now we see that in the market, it's actually how do you control all of these different systems together? And that seems to be what is still a real challenge in the market. So of the 93 fixtures that were submitted for the indoor and outdoor competition, 25 were recognized. Nearly 80% of those entries still had 85% of their lumen output at 50,000 hours, according to their calculations. So as an industry, it's a good milestone to see that we're really making progress and being very robust and being able to have confidence that these systems will last a long time, as we tell our clients that they will. 30% of the entries had greater than 90% CRI. So that's pretty impressive because we also have very strict efficacy requirements for the competition as well, because it is a Department of Energy program. And that does include, of the 30%, does include the outdoor fixtures as well, which would usually have a lower CRI. And then as I mentioned, dimming was a critical part of the evaluation, not just a bonus point, which is where we started with dimming in the competition. So with regard specifically to our connected lighting system, the manufacturers that submit these systems have to go through a lot to submit their documentation. It's a very robust process. So if you see that a manufacturer has been recognized through this program, you know that they have been thoroughly vetted and they have put a lot of work and effort into submitting their system. So one of the first requirements is it needs to be DLC compliant. It needs to be code compliant, of course, that's a basic requirement. These connected lighting systems needed to be able to adjust the lighting for daylight contribution. They needed to have occupancy sensors and vacancy sensors. There needed to be some way of people in the space, some way for them to be able to control the system, either the wall mount control or remote control. And then we also wanted to show some type of complex zoning within the space by having some overlapping systems. So For example, you might have 6 fixtures and 4 are on one zone and 2 are on another, and then change it to 3 and 3, as an example. And then, because this was a pilot, we also gave some latitude. Some options were whether the system would be wired or wireless, or a hybrid. So maybe, most of the components would be wired, and then they would have wireless sensors, for an example. Or everything could be integrated into the fixtures, or it could be a separate control system, separate from the light fixtures. So we gave them that opportunity to decide what they wanted to submit to meet the requirements. This is a detail of the occupancy sensor portion of the submission form that the manufacturers need to submit. So just showing you the level of detail, going step by step by step. Does it have occupancy sensing? What type of occupancy sensing? Can you switch it to vacancy sensing? Can you change the timing of the sensors? All of that needed to be documented by the manufacturers. And all of the different requirements had the same level of requirements. So that would be for daylighting and for controls and all of that as well. The evaluation setup. So this is a photo of the actual evaluation. One of the struggles that we've had is, how do you judge systems in apples to apples installation? It's very hard. When you have a photocell, for example, if one is 8 feet from the window and one is 10 feet from the window, how do you evaluate that, equally and fairly? So that was a challenge that we had. So for 2016, we took one room, we put all of the systems in the one room. So you can see in this photo, there's one system on at the time, and then the other fixtures are off. So we're evaluating the one system that's on. We let the manufacturers decide if they wanted to submit 3 or up to 6 luminaires. So we had light level requirements, and they could decide how they were going to meet those light level requirements. We simulated daylighting by having a bank of floodlights outside the perimeter wall that had a clear story, so that each of the systems would have the same type of daylight contribution for evaluation. And then we looked at occupancy sensor and vacancy sensors and timed those and evaluated those as well. So evaluation protocol. So we showed you the entrant guide already. So there's a very robust, before they can even submit their system, they need to meet all those requirements. And then we have pre-qualification checklist of capabilities. So this is a checklist that NGL staff does for us before we get on site and look at the systems in person. So really going through what's been submitted, going through the documentation, making sure that the systems really do meet the requirements. If they're not, they may be disqualified. Typically, our NGL people are very collaborative with the manufacturers, and we'll just call them and say, did you miss sending something? Do you want to send something else? Because it's a very inclusive type of competition. And then we also review the documentation. So again, it's the NGL staff, but then we had 2 of the judges assigned to each entry to also evaluate the documentation. So myself as a specifier, can I look at their documentation and tell what type of equipment is going to be part of the system, how it's all connected? Does it have vacancy sensor? Can I adjust the timing of that? Because the documentation is also important for specifiers and for the market. So all of that happens before we get to the on-site evaluation. And then we have our on-site form, which each of the judges has. We look at lighting performance, dimming performance, sensor performance. And then we also look at the installation and configuration. So the staff that are installing the systems give us feedback and take notes on how the system was to install. And also Dan was on site as the systems were being installed to take notes and let us know. So when we're evaluating the systems, we also hear if it took an hour to install, if it took 8 hours, if they had to do some type of runaround to make it work, if they had to call the factory to get it installed. Obviously, all of those things are very important as well. So that's part of the evaluation. And this is just a detail of the on-site evaluation. You can see all of the different categories that we look at. Some of them are a bit easier to evaluate, like color and appearance, smoothness of dimming, and then other things are typically harder for us to look at: installation, serviceability. Some of those things are harder. So as NGLS evolves, we try to get better at looking at those more complex portions of the systems. Can you hand me my water, Craig? Excuse me. Thank you. So we saw two basic system types. So the first system was the external controller with networked luminaires. Everything had to be in the room, but some of the components could be on the wall or in the ceiling. And then we had the self-contained network, where everything is on the fixtures. So external controller, manufacturer supplies the control system and the luminaire by others. Some benefits of this type of system that we determined after looking at them is you might have more robust control functionality, maybe more flexibility. You can typically interface with a BMS, so you might use this type of system for your larger projects. More options for luminaire types. I know myself as a specifier, I look at the luminaires first and then the controls. Something we've been talking about in our steering committee is maybe that's switching. Maybe we're going to start looking at the controls and then light fixtures, or at least at the same time, as these systems become more connected. And this type of external controller might be more well suited for new construction and complex projects. Limitations: dual points of responsibility. You have a light fixture manufacturer and control system manufacturer. More complicated installation, typically. More complicated startup and commissioning. And it may be costly for some smaller projects for this to have this type of system. So the self-contained network, integrated fixture, kind of out-of-the-box systems. I think we've probably all seen these types of systems where they really do say you can take it out of the box, install it in the ceiling, connect it to the power, and then it will run. So that was, really good for us to start really evaluating that type of system. Benefits: integrated solution, only one point of responsibility because the fixtures and then controls are coming from the same manufacturer. Simple installation, startup, and commissioning. That's something we need to evaluate and make sure that it's true. And then well suited for retrofits and smaller projects. Or if you have a project, maybe you have 30 classrooms that are all the same, maybe you would use this type of system in those classrooms and have the other type of networked system for the rest of the spaces. So it could be a hybrid as well. Limitations: limited control functionality, usually less flexibility. They're really designed for a certain application or a certain size room, and then fewer options for luminaire styles. So some of the things that we noticed, or the challenges that we are addressing in our 2017 competition. So there were 4 connected lighting systems submitted. 3 were judged to be notable. They all had strengths and limitations. There was no clear winner or best of the category. We also felt like our way we could evaluate the systems was not perfect yet, so we didn't feel like we could be really definitive with our outcome as well, because we knew we needed to do some better evaluations, which you'll see in 2017. How do you know whether the system capability matches your project needs? I think that's a big issue for the market, so that's something to really look at. A lot of these systems can possibly do a lot more than you need it to do for your project. So how do you determine what is really right for your client and for your project? How do you know it's been correctly configured? Is a professional commissioning person required? Are the out-of-the-box systems really out-of-the-box systems? And again, that's what we'll be looking at more in 2017. So trying to evaluate that installation process in more detail. And then if you have to troubleshoot something, is it capability? Did you maybe specify the wrong system? Were you expecting it to be able to do something it just can't do? The configuration, maybe it's not configured correctly, or it could actually be that there is part of the system that is just not operating correctly. So how do you troubleshoot? So that's another thing that we can do with more time in 2017. So we wanted to have more robust evaluation, more time to evaluate, to really look at the sensors and how the system controls the light over time and energy savings over time. And then we wanted to have a more consistent and better configuration process. So again, that idea of really being able to evaluate different systems in an apples-to-apples type of application. So that's the 2016 prototype of the connected lighting system.
So 2016 was basically a transition year, moving from single luminaires to connected lighting systems to some degree. In 2017 and actually beyond, we are fully committed to looking at connected lighting systems. And in fact, the 2017 competition is actually a 2017-2018 competition. And the first level of that, competition number 1, is actually underway right now. So the first competition in the fully connected lighting systems program is basically easy to commission new luminaires. There's a second competition that is easy to commission conversion kits for retrofit functions. Competition 3, more capable, more complex. As you can see, we're moving up in complexity as we move further into the program, and in particular, static white luminaires, not static from a static air handling point of view, but static from a control standpoint, and particularly relative to color tuning, because our tunable white, that is, in competition 4, not 3, up there, more capable, complex, tunable white luminaires there as well. And specifically, this is actually part of the entrant guide. If you go to the next generation lighting systems, we're all going to do that for a while, aren't we? Next generation lighting systems website, you'll find the entrant guide, which has basically these descriptions in it. So again, competition 1 underway now, easily commissioned out-of-the-box systems. Retrofit small-scale new construction is the typical installation. We're looking at single manufacturers as typical, but we will allow partnerships between a controls manufacturer and a luminaire manufacturer, for example, but we want a single point of contact, so there's one submitter in those partnerships. The judging will be beyond what we've done in the past, so we'll include electrical contractors, building owners, utility representatives, as well as lighting designers in evaluating these systems. And specifically for competition 1, we are looking at 2 luminaire types, a suspended luminaire as well as a recessed luminaire. Competition number 2, still easily commissioned systems that are basically now compatible with conversion or retrofit kits, with the idea that we're focusing on the retrofit market. Single manufacturers, typical, again, partnerships will be allowed with a single point of contact. Again, judges, electrical contractors, who would be important as part of this process in both of these, building owners and utility reps. Not lighting specifiers as much here because it is a retrofit competition. And suspended are recessed 1 type per entry, and that's true for the competition number 1. Again, moving up in capability, competition 3, new construction. Partnerships are single manufacturer entries allowed, and you can see the reviewers there again, lighting designers, system integrators and programmers, building owners, utility reps, and contractors, adding this system integrators and programmers because we're talking about more complex systems that will require involvement to some degree of those sorts of folks. multiple luminaire types would be allowed, and then the fourth competition continuing to move in that, into that level of complexity, higher complexity. And again, this would be the tunable white competition as well. The objectives of the 2017-2018 competition, specifically for competition one, since that's the one that's underway right now, which is again luminaire integrated and easy to commission. Luminaire integrated control is what we mean by that, by the way. We will be following what we tend to think of as the typical building specification, design specification construction process. So we are looking at members of the steering committee being the design team. So once a manufacturer submits a product to us, we'll be the designers. We will then, as you would in normal situations, turn that over to the manufacturer to basically submit shop drawings. We'll review the shop drawings. And the whole idea is that we're evaluating the specification process. Then we'll move on once systems are actually delivered on site, and we'll be evaluating the installation part. So electrical contractors will be involved in that part of the assessment. We plan on videotaping and photographing the process, identifying the problems that would occur at the installation part of the design, building design and construction process. And then we'll be looking at configuration and control operation, looking at the commissioning of the lighting system as well, and then ultimately the lighting performance and the user response. So we will have an assessment of what's actually being delivered. We'll be measuring lighting levels in the spaces where these systems are installed at the full output level, the dimmed levels that are specified, assessing the daylight contribution relative to the dimming performance and those sorts of things. And then ultimately, the user response. So that implies that we're putting this in real spaces that will be used on an everyday basis. And ultimately then, our objective is to recommend effective specifications for connected systems, what's going to be different in the specification process for these types of systems, identify improvements that can be undertaken in the configuration process, and really, again, providing a real-world test bed for manufacturer feedback. Systems will be installed for a minimum of 2 years, for example, and manufacturers themselves will be allowed, if upgrades occur, for example, be able to upgrade those systems, but they'll be there and available to assess over a much longer period of time. So fairly quickly here, across the 4 competitions, some basic system parameters. Again, new retrofit kit, new, tunable color, no, but then yes for number 4, competition number 4. Luminaire integrated sensor and control is preferred in competitions 1 and 2 and becomes optional in competitions 3 and 4. Easy commissioning, meaning we don't have to bring the manufacturer on site to get these things to operate, is the ideal for competitions 1 and 2, and then optional for competitions 3 and 4, recognizing the complexity of those systems. Basic control performance is pretty much the same across the 4 competitions, looking for occupancy sensing, local on-off daylight harvesting, continuous dimming, high-end trim, individual luminaire addressability, and zoning. All of those would be characteristics we'd want to see across the 4 competitions. And then some enhanced capabilities. Things that would be optional in competition 1 and 2 would be energy monitoring, time of day scheduling, demand response, but then those would be required in competitions 3 and 4. And then the rest, adaptation of remote signal, plug load control, building systems integration, and remote diagnostics would be optional across the 4 competitions. So where are we installing these? We're installing these here in New York at Parsons School of Design. We have a team of graduate students that will assist us in part of this process. We currently have identified 5 rooms. Actually, the numbers are a bit off here. So we have 5 rooms that are identical for suspended luminaires. They're simply exactly the same room on different floors of the building. And then we have 4 spaces that we've currently dedicated to recessed systems on different floors, actually a pair of spaces on different floors there as well. You can actually see the existing layouts, but in some of those spaces. Obviously, it will depend on the manufacturer's capabilities in terms of what the final layouts we design in these particular spaces. And I think I'll turn it over to Dan then to talk about specifications. And
Do you want to talk to specification? You wrote them.
I can mention it briefly, okay, while you're getting up. So we've identified very specifically for these particular spaces an illuminance delivered, average illuminance on the test plane, working plane of 45 to 55 foot candles. And that would be an initial illuminance value since we're talking about installed new systems and want to measure their performance up front. We're looking for a uniformity across the work plane of 2 to 1, color temperature 3500 K, and a minimum of 80 CRI for the system. And then luminaire luminance and intensity requirements would have to meet IES recommended practices as well. So again, the design team will be responsible for meeting these requirements, designing the systems to meeting these requirements. But we're giving the manufacturers an idea of what these will be so they have some sense for which product they would like to submit for this competition. And now I'll turn it over to
Oh, terrific. Okay, last piece of this is the control requirements. 2 zones for vacancy control, vacancy operation with 20-minute timeout period, and manual dim to no more than 10% of full output at lowest setting. Daylight dimming to maintain at least the target illuminance with 10% electric lighting when daylight alone provides 600 lux. So these are pretty specific, not necessarily very tight, but pretty specific requirements. Let's see. All right, submission process. Just for a moment, how many of you have worked on, either designing or supplying or installing, a control system that was intended, if not in practice, to be easy to commission? Okay, so we got some people here who can chuckle as we go forward in here. Our goal in trying to design the competition was to have something that would be fair to the submitting manufacturers, realistic to the real world, and would reveal, ideally, differences that would enable us to move forward in the industry. 3 broad things. So beginning with the submission process, manufacturers have to indicate an intent, and I'll tell you how many have done this, indicating what type of luminaire they want to do. They have to submit extensive documentation, as Melanie supplied. That is to say, because these are going to be installed and used for 2 years, we really don't want to have a bum product up there. And that was a concern since the previous competitions. You hung them up, you lighted them up, you looked at them, and then you sent them home. Not this one.
And Parsons will be using the spaces too.
Verification of the controls requirements. CALC, commercially available lighting controls, is the portion of the DLC process that is looking specifically at the same kinds of systems. And the NGL process took into account not only what they're doing, but a half a dozen utility specialists in this area as well, to get as broad a range of issues as we possibly could. At that point, the people who have been accepted will be assigned the room, as Craig said. Then they'll submit, and then they will ship and install, and then the fun begins. So here is the commissioning process. So now, who's done commissioning? Yeah. How well did it go? Yeah. It's tough. One of the takeaways from the pilot program, as Melanie explained it, is that we weren't really sure at the end of it, because we had a brief time to evaluate them, whether they weren't doing quite what we wanted because the system wasn't quite what we wanted, or whether the configuring or commissioning process wasn't what we wanted. I see you nodding over there. You've had the same experience. So here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to have a punch list to make sure everything is operating the way it's supposed to. And at that point, we will, as Craig observed, interview the contractors to get them to tell us how the installation of this system compared to their experience with non-control integrated or control-oriented system, to get a sense of how much more work was involved, if any. Then we're going to ask them to configure the system using only the manufacturer's supplied documentation, which we will have urged them to have read in advance. There's a lot of debate as to whether or not we should require that as opposed to urge it. Well, you guys can make up your own mind on that. And they're going to use the manufacturer's default values. In other words, commission it to what the manufacturer thinks it can do. And at that point, we are going to evaluate the configuration and very much the instructions. Okay. Suppose it didn't work. At that point, and at that point only, the manufacturer's representative, if they've volunteered to be there, they've been sitting on the side with duct tape over their mouths so they can't contribute. Duct tape comes off, and they can assist the contractor in getting it to work as it is intended to. That will also be noted all the way through. Okay? At that point, with everything now at default value, contractor goes back, and they will now have to configure it to our specified values. So the first thing we're testing is how easy it is to get it to work the way the manufacturer envisioned it. The second one is how easy it to get it to the way you want it to, assuming you would set those same specifications. Adjust from the defaults if needed, reconfigure to the new values, return, and after you've done that, return to the specified values and evaluate the configuration and instruction sheet. So it's a very robust process designed based on our experience with people who've been touching on this process to identify where the weak points might be and to provide as much flexibility to users as possible within the idea of something simple enough to be done by the installer and not by a factory specialist, or for that matter, a well-trained local sales representative. Okay. Next step. After that, as Craig observed, we're going to evaluate the controls operation, vacancy operation, daylight compensation, manual dimming. We're going to do the luminaire lighting evaluation. And then following that, and I think this is important as well, how do the users feel about the system? What do users do if they don't like control systems? You guys tell me. Come on, you know. What do? They turn them off. And right now we know that's one of the major reasons why controls are not as widely used in this country as we'd like them to be. So we're going to check that using Parsons students. The spaces will be available for others to go and evaluate as well. So this is unusual in the NGL competitions up until this point. It was just the judges who got a chance to see what was going on. Now, anybody in this community working through Parsons will have access to the spaces, not just the manufacturers whose products are installed there. Okay, so where are we? This is the intents to enter. We had 25 intents. Of those, 10 qualified. 6 of them didn't qualify. 7 of them moved to later competitions, and 2 of them are pending documentation. So this shows you the luminaire types. We clearly have enough to be able to cover all of the applications if we do it right. System makeup, this is the interesting thing. Single manufacturer means that one company is providing both the controls and the luminaire. Partnership means a controls company and a luminaire manufacturer are partnering. And as Craig said, in an effort to make this as realistic to the process, although the controls company is the driver, the order is, of course, going to have to come from whom? manufacture of the fixture too. So we're not allowing the controls company to prepackage in an effort to make sure this is as realistic as possible. And then when you look at this, 70% of them are going to provide integrated sensors, which solves that problem, and 3 of them are going to provide external controls. There's some question as to whether or not integrated sensors, which seem intuitively to be simpler and less expensive, might not really be. And maybe an external system works just as well and is as easy to install. We will find out. Okay, so this repeats the slide that Craig showed, and it tells you where we are. When we move to competition 2, we will have new locations, because we're leaving competition 1 in place, but similar protocols. When we move to competition 3, new locations and new protocols, because we're now dealing with more complex systems. Similarly, when we move to competition 4, which says 3. All right? And here it is. This is the invitation to you to get involved. Coordination for visit to the sites. I don't know, can everybody read that? That's Ruth.Taylor, RUTH.TAYLOR at PNNL.gov. She's the project manager for this, and she will coordinate with Parsons and timing. Alert manufacturers. And by the way, how many of you here are manufacturers in the room? Terrific. So, well, I guess I can't ask you to alert your competitors. But those of you who are not manufacturers, get in touch with all the people who aren't here and tell them about competitions 2, 3, and 4 and help them understand where their product is most likely to fit. Okay? Email NGLS to be on our mailing list and spread the word all the way through. Thank you. Questions? Yes, Elizabeth.
How far in advance will you be announcing the dates for competition 2, 3, and 4 on the NGL website?
We haven't asked Rick Perry about that yet. I don't know.
There was a change in the intent to submit deadline for competition 1.
Correct. It's fair to say that the process of getting everything together, especially installing permanent lighting in a third-party Parsons location, turned out to be somewhat more time-consuming than we had anticipated. So on the one hand, some of them are easier and some of them are more difficult. Others, we've got some experience in it. We would like to be able to provide plenty of advance notice on this. Follow-up.
Another question. You made a statement about setting the manufacturer defaults, and you made a comment about there being some variation to then testing to the NGL standards. So I was wondering...
Not standards. NGL sets specifications specifically for issues like multiple zones and timeout period.
So how much variation are you seeing between manufacturer default settings and the NGL settings?
We haven't analyzed all of their submitted documentation yet. I suspect, since we tried to set a practical specification, that we will be reasonably close. But in the wider world, we can't be assured of that when people start to look at their own situations and what their own specifications will be. So we thought that this adjustment to a external specification was a really critical element of it. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah.
Other questions?
Dan, is the NGLS an evolution of NGL? Will they still, the two of them exist, or?
I think both Melanie and Craig gave the following. Melanie said, if you looked at the results from the most recent 2 or 3 luminaire evaluations, you'd say that the quality of the products, the number one concern in terms of the origins of NGL, had really risen to the point where it wasn't as much of a challenge to find good ones. And therefore, there was a serious question as to whether your money, because after all, everybody knows this. This is your money that is being spent to do this, right? Because it's the Department of Energy. Couldn't be better spent someplace else. But Craig said, and I think this is equally important, that it isn't enough to evaluate the controls. We also have to evaluate the lighting quality, because after all, the users have to be successful. So I don't think we're going to drop the issues of quality that led to the origin of NGL, although I don't think we're going to do it the same way. Reasonable answer? Comments? You guys want to say something to that? Anything else?
I don't know. I think we'll keep evolving the system and the program, and, who knows? I mean, we constantly evaluate it and see where it should go. Those competitions 3 and 4, we have the parameters of those, but those might change as we do competition 1. We might say, okay, we need to focus more on this for competition 3 or 4. So it's constantly being evaluated. So I think it will be whatever the market needs is where we'll go.
Elizabeth, you were asking about timing for the 2, 3, and 4, and maybe I can give you some insight in that regard. So the target date for installation of these systems is the week of June the 12th for competition 1. And that seems fairly reasonable at this point. And maybe another piece of information that would be valuable for you to know, and Dan alluded to this fact, we want naive contractors with connected lighting systems. So the university has 6 major contractors, electrical contractors, that regularly do work for them. So we're interviewing the contractors up front and looking for a specific team from within those 6, and there may be multiple from one electrical contractor, that will be a naive team installing these systems. So we plan on installing all 9 systems concurrently during that week of June 12th. And obviously the evaluation is going to follow up on that, but I think Ruth has a pretty aggressive timeline for competition 2, because we've got a lot of the upfront work out of the way. Just imagine the U.S. Department of Energy operating through Pacific Northwest National Labs, which is part of Battelle Institute, trying to put a contract together with Parsons School of Design, a large design educational entity, and it just took far longer than we would ever expect. But we'll have a track record, so I think it'll go forward fairly quickly.
Yes.
So, say on manufacturing, my product passes after the 2 years, what kind of accreditation, what can I tag on to my, inspection saying it passed such and such NGLS? How much weight do I have to do that?
Well, I don't know. How many manufacturers have submitted to NGL before and been recognized? So there's a printed brochure, there's an online brochure and presence for those who are recognized as part of the program. And certainly, there's no restriction as far as I know in terms of using that in marketing materials.
I think the question was, when will
I'm
such a
sorry.
designation be available to
Oh,
you?
I apologize.
Did I get that right?
Yes, that's correct.
I missed the first word, so sorry about that.
I think
Go ahead.
Ruth plans to have a report on this that would include the commissioning process and the preliminary evaluation to the lighting requirements. The second part of it, the ongoing aspect that takes more time, would be a second evaluation. Whether it has the same term, NGLS recognized, that the team has yet to decide what the designation is going to be for this. We didn't offer any designation beyond notable, meaning you should take note of it, for the ones in the prototype because they weren't, frankly, recognizable. We're hoping that this year's competition, ideally, will have 10.
And
That may not be your ideal, but it's definitely our ideal.
I figured that, maybe you can put NGLS pending, within
Yeah.
a certain time frame, because,
Yes.
Wait for 2 years to say, hey, you know.
No, I mean, I
It's
think
not
that
going to, yeah.
there could be value in saying that your system is being evaluated by NGLS. Because you have gone through all of those initial steps, which there is something to that in itself, so.
I would be astonished, which is not to say I'm committing to it, I'd be very astonished if there were not designations available by Light Fair of 2018.
Okay, that's good.
I think that's the way, right? Because otherwise, you minimize the opportunity to spread the word, and that's
Right.
very much the objective. All right. Thank you all very much for taking the
Yes,
time.
thank you.
All right? Enjoy the show. Well, that's cool.
Okay, good job. Good job, guys. Thank you. As always.
Nice job.